Criminal justice is in crisis in Britain, but is Nigel Farage the man to fix it? Well, my name's Tom Harwood and this is GB News Originals. Remember to click that subscribe button to stay absolutely up to date. Now, Reform is going for a policy blitz. Yes, the party that has been leading in the polls for months is trying to flesh out its policy offer to the country. But what exactly is Reform offering when it comes to crime, justice and most crucially punishment? Well, we all know how full that British prisons have been. Not a single new prison has been built in its entirety in years, and the number who need to be in prison has kept going up. This led to a crunch point when the new government took power back in July last year. They initiated an early prisoner release scheme. This led to hundreds of prisoners being released before serving even half of their sentence. And this has led to people being hugely concerned about the level of crime and frankly the lack of punishment for that crime. There's huge concern over elements of shoplifting, over knife crime, so many different parts of the sort of criminal justice system that seem to be breaking down. The length of time that it takes to be bringing a criminal to trial has also massively expanded since the pandemic. On all levels, crime and justice seems to be broken in Britain. So what is the Reform offer to try and turn things around? Well, firstly, the prison place crisis. There has to be enough space to put criminals away in prison. There can't be a system, as we've been running for the last year or so, that if in order to put more people in prison, you have to take some people out of prison. It seems like a perverse way to run a criminal justice system. The Reform Party is saying that they want to build the equivalent of Nightingale hospitals, but for prisons. Back during the pandemic, although thankfully they didn't have to be used, massive new capacity was introduced to the NHS with temporary and fast constructed hospital places. Well, what if the same thing could be done with prisons? What if thousands of new prison places could be added in a relatively short amount of time? It doesn't seem like the current government has been rushing to create those prison places. There is a plan to create more prisons, more prison places, but it is a long order plan, not going to be finished by the time of the next election. The Reform Party, on the other hand, want to have construction get going immediately and a fast Nightingale prison plan that would enable a greater capacity to send people away and fast. Because quick justice is more real justice and potentially has that deterrent effect that currently clearly doesn't exist for so many offenders. So what exactly is the plan beyond a short-term sticking plaster Nightingale prison solution? Well, there's more to it too. The most serious offenders could be sent overseas. The Trump administration has been using prisons in South America as extra capacity, but also extra justice, of course, existing without the constitutional protections of the United States. There can be more harsh punishment for the worst criminals. The question rises, however, is this going to be compatible with British laws deporting foreign criminals? There are about 10,000 of them in our prisons. That seems to be something that would be relatively short order and simple to do, providing, of course, the countries that those criminals come from accept them. But having a third country, somewhere like El Salvador, to take the most serious prisoners, both domestic and foreign, in this country and deport them to and keep them in a foreign prison, could that be something that is achievable? The foreign prison offers that this country has had over previous years have not necessarily been taken up, and that's for one big reason. There are visitation rights for prisoners in the United Kingdom. They've been embedded in law for more than half a century and embedded under the auspices of the ECHR. Article 8 of the ECHR is the right to a family life. It's an incredibly famous part of that convention. But it also underpins some of those visitation rights for criminals and prisoners in this country.
Hello, I'm Bev Turner. Now, it can feel like the money in our bank accounts at the moment does not keep up with the cost of living. And maybe there's a solution. I'm here today with the CEO of TallyMoney, Cameron Parry. Cameron, what is TallyMoney?
Well, Bev, with TallyMoney, you get a current account and a debit card, but instead of pounds, you use milligrams of gold as your everyday money.
So why gold?
Gold traditionally is a great store of value. It has, on average, gone up at over 11% per annum for the last 25 years against the pound. It's tripled in value in the last decade. And in the last 2 years alone, it's increased by 50% against the pound. Banks' savings products just can't compete with that level of growth.
But this isn't just about gold. This is about a currency that you guys have created at TallyMoney. Explain it to me as though I'm an idiot.
So, look, people need to be able to hold their earnings and build their savings in a money that retains its value and remains in their legal control and remains theirs to access, away from government control.
Great. You had me at not exposed to government control.
You should feel safe and happy with your money. You should have peace of mind. The more money you see in your bank balance, and that's the type of thing we're trying to deliver, and give people choice in the type of money they get to use every day.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Cameron. Thank you.
Even the very worst prisoners have the right to be visited by their family. If they are imprisoned half a world away, in a prison in El Salvador that is run in a very different way than a prison in the United Kingdom would be, that would go against their visitation rights. So there would need to be much more whole-scale reform, potentially even withdrawal from the European Convention of Human Rights, in order to enact that. Now that could delay the amount of time that it takes for reform to actually get this policy up and running. But there are three strands there that we've covered over the prison policy of reform. Extra temporary Nightingale prisons in this country, deporting the 10,000 plus foreign criminals to their countries of origin, and for the very worst criminals, both domestic and foreign in this country, deporting them to prisons in countries like El Salvador. Now that seems to be a relatively comprehensive plan. Of course, more prisons would have to be constructed, and the military sites that the Reform Party says would host these Nightingale prisons, well, you can't just use more and more military land forever. There will of course be local opposition to some of these sites. People generally don't want a new prison near them, but there will also need to be a longer term prison construction programme. And of course, at the end of the day, all of this costs money. It costs money to deport people to foreign countries. It costs money to host criminals in foreign prisons. And it costs money to construct at rapid speed temporary prison accommodation and, over the longer term, more solid, greater capacity in our regular prison estate. Where is this money coming from? Well, Nigel Farage will have a 3-page document to suggest where this funding must come from, and that is being presented in his press conference today. But there are wider questions in terms of how the criminal justice system can implement a deeper sense of justice. What should be the default prison sentence for people who are caught with a knife? What should be the default prison sentence for people who are repeat shoplifters? There has been so much research to show that such a large proportion of crime is actually committed by a relatively small proportion of criminals. It's almost the Pareto principle, that 80-20 rule, that a small number of actors contribute a huge amount of any given activity. So could it be that a harsher prison sentence programme for the most prolific criminals actually has an outsized effect? That you crack down on the most prolific offenders and the amount of crime that actually reduces could be far more significant than the numbers you arrest suggests. There's some research to suggest that that's just what might happen. A few years ago in Ireland, in the west of Ireland, there was a car crash. That car crash happened to involve 2 or 3 of the most prolific burglars in that part of the country. And what happened in that area? Well, the number of burglaries didn't go down just by 1, 2 or 3. No, this unfortunate car crash that ended up killing these burglars reduced thefts in the area by an astonishing percentage. Way more than would be suggested by taking just 3 criminals off the streets. And again, we've seen some targeted action in London, with various police forces targeting prolific bike thieves. Just arresting 1 or 2 different criminals has been able to have a massive double-digit effects on reducing bike crime. Could you extend these different philosophies to the whole country at large, having longer and more serious prison sentences for those who seem to be the most prolific career repeat criminals? Could that have a massively outsized effect on the amount of crime that is in this country? Well, that is what some campaigners certainly seem to suggest. But of course there is another point of view. That's the point of view that the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, has been putting forward, that far fewer people should be going to prison in this country.
We must protect the public in whatever measures we pursue. Too often today, our prisons do the opposite. They create better criminals and not better citizens, with 80% of offenders now re-offenders. Across the world, there are models that we can learn from, and David and I both visited Texas earlier this year. There, offenders who comply with a strict regime earn an earlier release, while those who behave badly are locked up for longer. Crime there is now at a 50-year low, re-offending is down, and the prison population is under control.
Now, Shabana Mahmood references what has happened in Texas, an unlikely place for prison reform, you might suggest. But in Texas, there has been a greater emphasis on community rehabilitation for those less serious criminals. The Labour Party wants to introduce something very similar in this country and have a default system that many criminals would not be going to prison in the first place, particularly, for example, female criminals not going to prison. Now, would that be something that reduces crime? Would it not be? That is a philosophical debate to be had, but it does seem like the line in the sand is being drawn, certainly between the Reform Party's much more tough action order on this, with many more people in many more prison places, versus the Labour Party, which is suggesting we should imprison many fewer people and abolish short sentences altogether. Now, some people would suggest that abolishing short sentences is actually a tough criminal punishment issue. Very often, if people just go for a short amount of time in a prison cell, if you're only in for a few months and then out again quickly, is that going to really end your cycle of offending? Or is that going to introduce you to other criminals, new tactics, new gangs, new abilities to go out there and commit more crime after you've served a very short sentence indeed? But there is a difference in opinion in terms of the solution to the short sentence problem. Some would suggest just give these criminals longer sentences, keep them away for a greater amount of time, make the punishment much more severe, and then reduce the chance of offending. Others say these short sentences do nothing, abolish them entirely, have people who would have been sentenced to short sentences instead go through rehabilitation programs, perhaps community service too. Well, that debate will of course run and run, but today what Reform has done is set down a marker in the sand, where they stand on this crucially important issue of crime, justice and indeed imprisonment. It's an issue that is rising in salience amongst the British people and no doubt will form a significant element of the general election campaign that we're expecting in 2028 or 2029. Well, do get involved in the comments section down below. What do you think the correct policy to address the rising crime issues in this country should be? And have you noticed more crime in your area? Well, do remember to click that subscribe button too and stay up to date with all the policy offers of these parties. We may be perhaps 4 years away from the next general election, but that doesn't stop the long-run campaign rolling on.